As Chad schemes to ruin my life, will I expose his dark secrets before it's too late? You won't believe the shocking truth. It was a sweltering summer afternoon, the sun beating down mercilessly on the neighborhood, when I first caught a whiff of something strange wafting through the old walls of my newly bought home. An acrid, chemical smell made my stomach churn, overshadowing the excitement I had felt since moving in just days earlier. I had finally achieved my dream of homeownership, only to be greeted by what felt like an omen. My entitled neighbor Chad seemed to sense my uncertainty. His smug smile was as infuriating as ever as he leaned against his porch railing, arms folded across his chest. "Good luck with that old place," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, as if he reveled in my misfortune. Chad had a way of making everything feel like a taunting game, and I could sense the delight he took in watching me stumble through this new chapter in my life. I brushed off his remark, determined not to give him the satisfaction of seeing me falter. But that smell gnawed at my confidence, turning my thrill into worry. What if my dream home was just a cover for some hidden disaster? Compelled to unearth the source, I gathered my courage and decided to investigate the attic. Armed only with a flashlight and sheer curiosity, I climbed the rickety ladder leading to the crawl space. The door creaked ominously as I turned the handle, a warning sign that sent a shiver down my spine. As I stepped over the threshold, my heart raced. Was I ready for what lay beyond? The gritty atmosphere felt oppressive, even apprehensive, but there was no turning back now. The moment my light flickered across the attic's dim expanse, I braced myself for the worst. What I found sent chills rattling through my bones. A fully operational drug lab, eerily abandoned but hauntingly alive with memories. Glass beakers and disheveled equipment spread across the room, remnants of a sinister enterprise that had taken root in my own home. I gasped, my breath catching in my throat, thinking, what have I stumbled into? A mix of dread and disbelief washed over me as I took in the clandestine scene. Time seemed to stand still as I stepped closer, tugged by a morbid curiosity. The musty odor of stale chemicals clung to the air, and I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. I fought the impulse to turn and flee, knowing I had to confront the reality of what was happening in my sanctuary. My mind raced with questions. Who had lived here before me? How had they managed to operate a drug lab unbeknownst to the rest of the neighborhood? Or worse, how was I now tied to whatever illegal activity had transpired here? The undeniable truth dawned on me. I wasn't just dealing with an abandoned attic. I had stumbled into evidence of a criminal operation that could endanger my life and finances. Knowing I couldn't navigate this alone, I made the fateful decision to alert the authorities. The police arrived swiftly, treating my home like a crime scene, meticulously documenting every corner of the attic. Every time they moved about the space, I felt an unsettling pit in my stomach deepen. I had thought I was entering a new chapter, but instead, my life felt like a derailed train, threatening to crash under the weight of my misfortune. As the investigation unfolded, the challenges multiplied. They sealed off the attic, warning me of the potential toxic residue among the remains of the drug lab. Cleanup crews were summoned, and suddenly my dream home became a PR disaster unfolding before my very eyes. There was talk of contamination, implications of negligence, and the stark realization that my financial stability was precariously hanging in the balance. The stigma of living in a former drug lab loomed large, and I could foresee the uphill battles waiting for me. I was no longer just a homeowner. I was a victim of circumstance, shackled by a stigma I never asked for. Chad's words echoed in my ears, now mingled with that dreadful scent of chemicals. I had underestimated him before, but now I wondered. Had he known? Had he simply been waiting for me to fail? My feelings of despair morphed into determination. I would not let this become the life-altering disaster Chad might have hoped for. I would uncover the truth behind my home, confront the mess left behind, and reclaim my dream. But as I left the attic behind, a foreboding sensation settled in me. Would this investigation reveal more than just a shattered dream, or would it plunge me deeper into the darkness that enveloped this house? Whatever lay ahead, I remained resolute. The fight for my home had only just begun. The realization sank in like a stone in my gut. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a ticking time bomb waiting to expose everything I cared about. I stumbled backward, heart racing, and almost collided with Chad, who had followed me, his morbid curiosity wrapped in a layer of smug satisfaction. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue?" he teased, taking unacceptable pleasure in my horror. He didn't understand, or perhaps he did, reveling in the chaos he knew he'd thrown into my life. The air felt heavy as I looked around, the wreckage of a past life lurking in every corner, and my pulse quickened as I sprinted to the nearest phone. I couldn't afford to wait. I had to call the authorities now. The moment I dialed 911, I felt as if I had crossed an invisible line. Admitting I was in over my head made it real. The operator responded with a seriousness that only exacerbated my fears, asking questions I hadn't even begun to process. When they assured me help was on the way, I hung up, a mix of relief and dread coursing through my veins. As I stood at the edge of the attic, I could hear the soft rustling of Chad's footsteps behind me, as faint smells of chemicals continued to invade my senses. Whatever residue was still in the air felt like an inescapable shroud tightening around my life. Once the police arrived, the atmosphere transformed. Dramatically flashing lights illuminated my driveway, turning my once warm, welcoming home into a cold, sterile crime scene. I shuddered as officers wrapped the area in yellow tape, creating a barrier that felt like a mockery of my shattered dreams. Neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn like moths to a flame, their stares piercing through the heavy silence. I felt their judgment weighing down on me like a leaden blanket, their murmurs echoing in my head. What a disaster. My throat tightened at the realization that I would be the topic of gossip on everyone's lips. And there was Chad, lurking at the edge of the scene, his lean figure silhouetted against the flashing lights. He had donned that annoyingly satisfied smirk, as if he had orchestrated this entire spectacle just to watch me squirm. "You know, it's quite the story you've got here," he called out, his tone syrupy sweet, dripping with faux sympathy. The contrast between his banal amusement and the gravity of my situation rubbed salt in my already festering wounds. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks as shame washed over me, the humiliating realization that I was completely at the mercy of forces beyond my control. After what felt like hours, the police conducted their inspections with meticulous diligence. They questioned me extensively, the officers' stern faces illuminated by the harsh glow of their flashlights as they examined every inch of the attic. I was exhausted, emotionally drained by this surreal experience, and I could feel the weight of every word I said. "Yes, I just moved in," I repeated numbly. No, I had no idea. The sobering truth threatened to unravel my shaky composure. Not only had I bought a house, but I had unwittingly bought into a legacy of crime. As they interviewed me, I glanced back at Chad, still soaking in my demise like a bird of prey. I wondered how much he knew had he seen the signs. Had he just been waiting for someone like me, someone eager to prove themselves in his tight-knit community? Every glance he threw my way was a calculated jab, a reminder of my vulnerability. I felt the overwhelming urge to confront him, but the officer's presence kept me tethered to my spot, an unyielding anchor in this tempestuous sea of chaos. The investigation was slow, painstaking. Hours ticked by, and with each minute, my sense of security crumbled further. Eventually, the officer in charge finally noticed just how visibly distressed I was. It turned out they found traces of various toxic substances residues, left behind by whatever had been concocted in my attic. The news felt like a punch to the gut. How could the previous owners have left this mess? The cleanup would be extensive, and the threat of toxic exposure loomed ominously over my head. The officer assured me that they were sealing off the area as a precaution. Little did I know, sealing it off would only mark the beginning of my struggle. The cleanup crews arrived days later, clad in protective suits that looked far too serious for something I thought would be an exciting new beginning. They documented the site methodically, converting my once cherished home into a sterile white canvas that felt utterly foreign. As they began scraping away at the remnants of a life I'd never lived, I could only watch helplessly from the sidelines, my financial stability shaken to its core. My mortgage payments, once my beacon of hope for the future, now felt like shackles binding me to a nightmarish scenario I had never signed up for. I could hardly keep track of the papers and forms piling up in my inbox, documents full of warnings, notices about potential contamination, reminders of my dwindling savings. How was I going to explain this to anyone? My heart raced. It was a PR disaster I could have never anticipated. As the days dragged on and my fresh paint peeled away to reveal rotten wood beneath, the excitement of homeownership morphed into a pitiful struggle for my sanity. Just when I thought I was at my lowest, I caught sight of Chad loitering outside my home again, his smirk as wide as ever, relishing my suffering, and I swore I could see the wheels turning in his head. As I retreated indoors, exhaustion washed over me, and I knew deep down that I was in this fight whether I wanted to be or not. My home was no longer a refuge. It had become a battleground against the whispers of a neighborhood that had turned sour. The weight of my situation pressed down on me, and it was infuriating knowing that Chad was enjoying this so much from the sidelines. He'd better not get too comfortable because I was determined not to allow my dreams to evaporate into thin air. If I had to confront him or worse, confront a future filled with toxic phantoms, then I would. The days ahead promised conflict, revelations, and a reckoning that neither Chad nor I were fully prepared for. The dreary twilight settled over my home, shadows inching closer, as I slipped into the suffocating silence of evenings spent in dread. Days turned into agonizing weeks as I grappled with the aftermath of the authorities' response to my discovery. Each dawn stole away a piece of my hope, leaving me ragged and drained, while thoughts of the drug lab haunted my mind. My finances took a severe toll from the cleanup. Expenses leached away my savings like broken pipes spilling water onto rotting wood. And across every moment I spent in this home, the weight of its stigma loomed larger, darker, pressing in from all sides like invisible chains, squeezing tighter around my soul. It was during one of those murky afternoons that I spotted Chad again, slinking around my front porch as if he owned the place. Always seemingly at the right place at the right time, his presence felt like a stunt double stepping into a scene that should have been forgotten. He leaned casually against my banister, a mock-innocent look on his face, his gaze glittering with malicious delight. "You know, you could always just sell," he suggested, his voice dripping with false concern. The way he said it made it sound so simple and yet malicious, like a cruel prank played on someone trapped in a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. I felt trapped, like a puppet dancing on strings I couldn't see. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I discovered a letter from my mortgage bank. My stomach dropped and twisted as I slid my fingers over the envelope hints of immediate and hefty fees due. The words swam in front of me, numbers that loomed larger than life, a financial landmine I had never seen coming, and here was Chad, seemingly twisting the knife with his every word. Behind him, my house stood silent and menacing, still bearing the scars of chaos. As if sensing my turmoil, Chad chuckled, regarding me as a marionette, twitching from the mounting strain of this dark play. I forced myself to breathe, but my heart raced like a tainted drum. The walls of my supposed sanctuary closed in, choking out any recollection of peace. This sensation of being hunted deepened with every passing day, my instincts screaming at me to move, to get away from the specter of Chadaman whose smile I couldn't trust, who seemed to find delight in my downfall. The sheets of paper piling up in my home became a chorus, whispering doubts in my ear. I wished for someone to offer clarity, but all I could do was face the bitter reality. My former joy in homeownership had disintegrated, replaced with a desperate desire to escape the twisted legacy that had been thrust upon me. Chad's voicing of my seemingly insurmountable plight, coupled with the creeping anxiety over my dwindling finances, made me feel like a juggler forced to add flaming torches to an already explosive act. I needed a plan, a way to steal back control, but every whisper of hope felt muted against the cacophony of my overwhelming circumstances. The oppressive tension congealed in the air, like a simmering storm, waiting to unleash its fury. I clutched the bank letter tightly, elaborate schemes bubbling in my mind, each one clashing against the reality of my precarious existence. I couldn't allow Chad's smirk to continue thriving at my expense. I needed to regain my footing, to wrest away my narrative from his treacherous grip. Head spinning, I sorted through various options as shadows danced mockingly in the corners of my vision. In my restless slumber, I dreamt of confronting him, exposing his charade before all the watching eyes in the neighborhood, forcing the truth to spill out like the toxic secrets hidden within my attic. But I needed the evidence, the truth laid bare before I could unravel the web he'd woven around me. The adrenaline pulsed beneath my skin, igniting a determination I hadn't tapped into before. I could fight back. I had to. As the clock struck midnight, a sudden idea took root, one that could pull me from this abyss and put the narrative back in my control. I had buried my findings beneath layers of fear and ignorance, sufficient evidence hidden deep within the recesses of my mind. As the moonlight slipped through my bedroom window, I felt the first flicker of hope, a true path forward, illuminated by the belief that this wasn't over yet. The time had come to unearth the beast in my attic once more, confront my demons, and take back the life that had been robbed from me. And as I gathered strength from the darkness, an impending meeting hung in the air, echoing invitations, challenging my very resilience. I had to get ready. Something explosive was about to surface, and I would not rest until I unearthed every last truth hidden in the shadows. The cold chill of midnight wrapped around me, mingling dread with a sense of purposeful urgency. My heart raced as I clutched the device in my hand, me phone, its bright screen, illuminating the cluttered space in my living room. Just hours before, yet another anonymous message had slipped into my inbox. A digital ghost insisting that I should vacate this cursed neighborhood for my own safety. The words were a sinister echo of the fears that already plagued me, yet I knew I could not leave. This house, despite its haunted past, was my only refuge, and I had fought too hard to let its history drive me away like a frightened animal. I needed to confront this darkness, not run from it. In that eerie silence, surrounded by the stark shadows of my once inviting home, I turned detective. Anxiety twisted my gut, propelling me to dig deeper into the unknown. I unearthed files from the previous occupant, fragments of a life steeped in deception and criminality, leaving trails that were both unsettling and dangerous. Each detail I unraveled revealed a man who had buried secrets beneath floorboards and behind walls. The moldy smell in the attic had merely hinted at the grotesque transactions that echoed in the darkness. This drug lord had lived here, a specter whose actions had now turned my life into a living nightmare. But as I pieced together evidence, the threat of Chad loomed larger, creeping through my thoughts, like the weeds strangling the flowers in my neglected garden. He was always there, lurking in the periphery, waiting for a moment of weakness to pounce and tighten his grip on my already fragile world. Just when I thought I had made some headway in understanding my predicament, I received another shock that sent my pulse racing. Chad had planned a neighborhood meeting, an involuntary disclosure of my property's dark history, supposedly for transparency. The audacity of it left me staggering. The possibility of public disgrace felt like a noose, tightening around my neck. As dread settled like a heavy blanket on my shoulders, I prepared for the inevitable fallout. I envisioned my neighbors gaping at me, casting judgment like a jury, who had already decided my fate before I even opened my mouth. Despite my countless attempts to start anew, their memories of the police tape and flashing lights would thrive, long after I had wished them away. I could already hear Chad's voice in my mind, slithering through the gathering like venom, whipping up suspicion like a storm. Each interaction would be a reminder that I was trapped in this unholy charade, while he took pleasure in my dwindling reputation. With sweat prickling at my brow, I sank deeper into my research, hoping to find something that would allow me to push back against Chad's orchestrated assault on my name. The laptop screen illuminated the late-night hours with eerie blue light, becoming my sole companion in this quest for truth. I pieced together bits of news articles and social media posts, hints of the previous occupants' shady dealings. I noted connections to unsolved crimes, whispers of backroom deals, and criminal networks that flitted just out of reach. The lantern of hope ignited within me, illuminating a path I had yet to traverse. But each step felt precarious, with Chad lurking ever closer. The veil of safety I once had wrapped around me now felt as thin as gossamer, wavering under the weight of my recent discoveries. An intense wave of adrenaline surged through me. The thrill of uncovering hidden truths almost made me forget the fear gnawing at my heart each time I saw Chad's grin. Each click of the keyboard documented my descent into a world that had previously seemed so distant. My skin prickled with the anticipation of what I might uncover next. Did I dare confront Chad with this new knowledge? What if I did find a way to turn the tables on him? But then doubt crept back, whispering threateningly that my pursuit might lead to higher stakes than I anticipated. Maybe in unraveling the previous occupants' dark secrets, I might cross into dangerous territory myself. Chad had shown his willingness to manipulate, torment, and spread rumors about me. Once I exposed the underbelly of this community, who was to say he wouldn't use the same tactics against me? Staring into the abyss of my predicament, I felt like a tightrope walker with the ground rushing up to meet me. Just as I thought I might have a grasp on this narrative, the truth grew murkier. Already drained from the spiraling stress, I couldn't help but wonder if I was out of my depth. The idea of Chad hosting a neighborhood meeting was just the tip of the iceberg of chaos I had yet to navigate. As I stumbled through my makeshift sources, pieces of evidence, and half-baked plans for survival, the gears of despair began to turn again. Alone in the creeping dark of my living room, my resolve solidified. I wouldn't let Chad's threats suffocate my spirit any longer. This was not merely about a house plagued by a sinister past. It was also about reclaiming my power. My next move needed to be calculated, sharp as a knife, and I needed to prepare for the confrontation that lingered just ahead. I would not be a victim any longer. My mind swirled just as the clock struck 3, sounds of my neighbors' restless sleep drifting faintly through the walls. They were unaware of the storm brewing in their community, a storm soon to show them the truth behind their own comfortable lives. In that moment, I steeled myself come what may. The hidden lab beyond my attic would not win. This was not the end. It was merely the beginning, and I was determined to weave my tale into something powerful enough to confront the man who thrived on my despair. The sky was dark and oppressive, heavy with the foreboding anticipation of a tempest. As I huddled in my living room, the night air thick with anxiety, I glared at the stack of bills and legal documents on my coffee table. The low hum of my phone buzzed incessantly, a reminder that despite the chaos, my financial life was spiraling out of control. I had finally reached a breaking point. After countless sleepless nights and relentless harassment from Chad, my insufferable neighbor, I took a leap of faith. It was time to hire a lawyer-me last-ditch effort to salvage my financial future and reclaim my sanity from the clutches of this nightmare. The decision felt both exhilarating and terrifying. As I scoured the internet for local attorneys, my pulse quickened with each click. I had to find someone who understood the darkness lurking within my home. Someone willing to fight against the corrupt practices that had tangled my life into a hopeless mess. After a few consultations, I finally found a lawyer who appeared to grasp the complexity of my case. A ruthless woman with a fierce disposition and a reputation for taking down shady characters like Chad. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could turn the tide in my favor. However, as I prepared to disclose everything to my lawyer, the bizarre messages, the hidden lab, and Chad's insidious behavior, I discovered something even more sinister. During our initial meetings, my lawyer mentioned casually, without a flicker of surprise, that hidden cameras had been frequently found in homes where previous illegal activities had occurred. My blood ran cold. Paranoia seeped into my veins. Had Chad been watching me all along? Was he collecting evidence against me for reasons beyond mere neighborhood gossip? The implications of such a revelation weighed heavily on my shoulders, filling me with dread. Fast forward to our first legal confrontation. I sat across the table from my lawyer, equipped with stacks of evidence and a firm resolve. However, the atmosphere felt deceptively calm, as if a storm was brewing just out of sight. As we discussed the possibility of a hidden clause regarding disclosure of the property's hazardous history, I glanced out the window and saw Chad lurking a few houses down. His smile was a predator's grin, that unmistakable gleam of malicious delight in his eyes. Here was a man eager to exploit my misfortunes, ready to unleash any manipulation necessary to maintain his power over me. My heart raced as I wondered what leg he had to stand on, knowing full well that I possessed so much more than he cared to reveal. Just when I thought I had a solid plan and a clear path ahead, my lawyer dropped another bombshell. Chad has a long history of legal troubles and manipulation, she warned, her voice laced with concern. I was stunned. Had my tormentor been playing this elaborate game of chess with me all along? No ordinary neighbor wore such a facade. What kind of threat was I dealing with, and just how deep did his corruption run? The implications made my skin crawl, overshadowing the fragile hope I had started to build. I couldn't help but feel like a pawn dangled in front of a ruthless player intent on holding power over the board. As chaos swirled around me, I received another anonymous message. This one read, "You're in over your head. You should consider your options carefully." The shiver that ran down my spine was enough to rouse the fear that had nestled deep within me. Had Chad sent this to intimidate me further, or was it a ploy from someone who sympathized with his cause? With every whisper of doubt creeping in, I stood once again at a crossroads: confront Chad outright, or keep gathering evidence and bide my time. This was not purely a battle for a home anymore. This was a battle for my life, my dignity, and my safety. Now, trapped in this cycle of manipulation and fear, I gathered my warriors, the evidence I had painstakingly compiled. I spread it out on my dining room table, each piece a testimony to the struggle I had endured. Photographs of the hidden lab, documents from the police investigation, and medical reports highlighting the toxic risks breathed life into the argument I hoped to present. I envisioned myself cornering Chad at the neighborhood meeting he had orchestrated, a sinister smile plastered on his face as he prepared to strike. But I would not walk into that meeting as a victim. I was the witness to his underhanded tactics, armed with the very truth he had tried so desperately to conceal. As the meeting loomed closer, I felt more alive than I had in weeks. This was the moment I was waiting for, a chance to bring the truth out into the light and share my story with the community. But beneath the surface, this adrenaline surged through me in a volatile mix. Would they even believe me? With every fiber of my being, I hoped they would see Chad's deceit just as clearly as I had. I needed their support to reclaim my space and my narrative in this toxic neighborhood saga. One question repeated in my mind, driving my preparations. Was I ready to face that devilish grin, prepared for what might happen once the truth was unleashed? Moments before confronting my neighbors, a thought curdled in my stomach. Just as the clock struck 7, anxiety tightened its grip around me, reminding me how much was at stake. Either I would unmask the twisted games Chad had been playing and reclaim my home, or I would become yet another pawn sacrificed on his chessboard of lies. My determination solidified. The harrowing timeline of grief I had traversed had forged a fortitude within me I didn't know I possessed. The time for hiding was over. I would step into the ring, unflinching and ready to fight for my life. As those doors swung open, I vowed to leave no stone unturned. In that moment, as the meeting began, I felt the weight of my past dissolve into a sense of finality, which filled me with trepidation and hope in equal measure. The stakes were higher than I could ever have predicted. I had nothing left to lose, and in this turbulent battle against Chad, it would all come down to visibility and brave confrontation. As the sun set, casting an orange glow across the neighborhood, tension filled the air at the community meeting. I stood before my neighbors, clutching a stack of documents and photos that I hoped would unveil the truth about the horrors lurking in my attic. The room was suffocatingly quiet, every eye fixed on me, and I could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down like clouds before a storm. My heart raced, and a low buzz of anxiety threatened to silence me. But I took a deep breath and began to steer the conversation into the dark depths of the drug lab that had turned my life upside down. I detailed my discovery, how the pungent, acrid smell lured me into that cursed crawlspace, where I encountered a fully operational drug lab, signage of a past life that should have stayed buried. I watched as their expressions shifted from curiosity to shock, disbelief seeping across the faces belonging to those who had once trusted Chad implicitly. The evidence I laid out before them, a photo of the toxic barrels, the official report from the police, and the medical assessments documenting the danger lingering in my home gushed forth like a dam bursting. I was no longer just a victim. Today, I was their messenger of truth. As I spoke, the walls of my home transformed into an echoing chamber of Chad's deceit. I highlighted his history. He thrived on manipulation and intimidation, a puppet master in our small neighborhood. Digging through the web of lies he spun, I included the countless times he had tried to undermine my credibility. Each revelation I shared was punctuated with gasps and murmurs. I mentioned the anonymous threats I received, those chilling messages warning me to abandon my home. These weren't merely coincidences. They were fabrications spun by a man whose malice hid behind a friendly smile. The room stirred with unease, and I could sense the shift in perspective as they began to see Chad for the wolf cloaked in sheep's clothing that he was. Chad, who had always projected an aura of confidence and authority, sat rigidly in his chair, his charm unraveling with each moment. His smirk faded, replaced by a glare filled with panic, and I found a terrible satisfaction in the realization that he could no longer wield his power over me. The neighbors who had previously embraced him were whispering amongst themselves, their attention shifting toward Methawoman, who dared to uncover the truth buried in the shadows. I could see it in their eyes. They reconsidered who they believed, and they were confronting the uneasy reality that Chad was not the man they thought he was. As I pushed forward, I turned the conversation toward the financial repercussions we all faced as a community. My home, once a picturesque dream, had morphed into a cautionary tale, and I reminded them of the loss we all faced when confronted by Chad's deceptions. The cleanup cost not only affected me, but threatened every property value in the neighborhood. The stigma of being next to a former drug lab, making potential buyers hesitate. I made it clear. This wasn't just about me. It was about our collective safety, and our homes becoming sanctuary once more. Shocking murmurs rippled through the room, confirming that the community recognized the stakes we all had in this fight. Finally, the room began to erupt. Voices echoed as neighbors rallied together, their collective outrage igniting a fire of solidarity against Chad's underhanded tactics. Someone asserted that they had noticed similar patterns in Chad's previous dealings, and another neighbor remembered a troubling event involving a different homeowner. In that moment, a bond formed. They weren't just spectators, but participants in our shared plight. I felt a surge of empowerment, the fear that had clutched at me for weeks, transforming into a sense of purpose. Together, we sought justice against a villain who had preyed upon our trust. Chad, sensing the tide turn, attempted to speak, stammering defenses and denials that sounded increasingly desperate, but his words fell flat against the weight of the evidence gathered against him. The community, now fully aware of his twisted antics, met his bluster with incredulity. As I watched, horror and anger carved deep lines into his face. The sense of control he once enjoyed crumbled effortlessly. The crowd's energy palpably shifted, their stance turning from quiet disbelief to a fervent rejection of his manipulations. I felt myself steering the wheel of our collective fate, my heart soaring as my voice rang out clear and unwavering. By the end of the night, as we closed the meeting, I couldn't help but feel the palpable wave of freedom wash over me. I had left behind the despair and fear that had invaded my home. The impending confrontation had vindicated me, as the truth had been laid bare. Chad stood isolated, his reputation in tatters, the fragile facade dismantled within the crucible of the community's wrath. I no longer felt like a victim. I had reclaimed not just my voice, but the essence of my homia fortress fortified by truth, and the resilience of those willing to stand against injustice. As I stepped out of that meeting room, a sense of calm enveloped me, dispelling the storm clouds that had loomed over my life for what felt like an eternity. My neighbors now walked beside me, emboldened and united against a common enemy, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a genuine smile tug at my lips. This house was more than a home. It was a sanctuary, rebirthed from the ashes of fear and betrayal. In that sweet, sweet moment, we were no longer bound by Chad's webs. We were free.